Welcome everybody to our fifth session of at my kitchen table, talking volleyball with the experts from around Canada. Today we're looking at demystifying post-secondary education and post-secondary volleyball programs. Trying to bring on the top people that know the most about post-secondary volleyball programs and get them to give us some insights and some tips and some tricks and some things that would help us as coaches and also as athletes try to achieve our goal of playing at that next level. So using our club season to move to the next level, and how can we do that? So I want to welcome, first of all, three of the top coaches in university, U Sport, CIS, and can I even say the one before that? What was that one before CIS? Was
CIU.
CIU, that's right. So all three of them, you've gone through all three phases. And so thank you, Dave Preston from McMaster University, Doug Reimer from UBC, and Brenda Willis from Queen's University. I really appreciate you guys coming on and lending your expertise to us all. What we want to do first is we'll take a quick, have both Doug and Dave talk about their programs in terms of what their process is in recruiting. So when do they start their thought process? How do they determine what they need to recruit? All those types of things that go on in behind the scenes that we don't know about. Get their insight into that. So Doug, why don't we start with you and maybe give us just a quick idea of what's going on.
Sure. Thanks very much. And I'll be brief to start with because I think we can dial into this in a lot more detail. You know, I don't think there's any one exact path. So for the coaches listening, if you're talking to your athletes, it doesn't hurt to reach out early. It can be too early. Like we've had athletes, you know, sort of in grade 8, and you're just like, okay, we're not ready for that. Can you get back to us in a couple of years? So I'd say there's several paths. One is we're going to hear about some of the best players and we're going to research that, right? So if players on provincial team now, you know, especially if it's in the province that you live, or youth or junior national team, you're going to know, every good university coach is going to figure that piece out. So if you're not in that and you've decided you want a certain university, you need to reach out to that. And I think, you know, we can talk about that in more detail. In terms of just from a coach's point of view, you're looking at it from a number of different points of view, but you're really looking at going a couple of years ahead. Where are we graduating? How many are we graduating in what positions? And that's the starting point that we'll sit down with our coaching staff and take a look at, and that'll determine a little bit how, you know, where we're starting our process. So I'll just leave it there for the first minute and turn it over to Dave.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Colin, for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope everybody is safe and healthy. Recruiting is probably a little bit different now than it used to be 20 years ago. With just the sheer number of athletes that are looking to play now, the number of programs that are actively recruiting more, and the number of opportunities that there are to play. So I think the recruiting process has evolved just like the sport has. For me, it's very, very specific. We only bring in 3 to 4 athletes a year. So it's not like we recruit en masse. Sometimes the classes get a little bit bigger than that, but as Doug mentioned, you kind of forecast out. So you can kind of have a little bit of succession planning in your turnover. So you're not graduating 7 at once. At least that is for me. But the other thing, Colin, is that the top end of our roster, say the players from 1 to 9, 1 to 10, they usually stay for 4 to 5 years, depending on their degree and how their academic load is structured out of that. But the bottom end of our roster from 11 to, and I'd like to only carry, if I could, I'd only carry 16. But because of the nature of our environment, I usually end up carrying 18. And so from 11 to 18, it usually turns over every 2 to 3 years. I think the athletes realize that the investment is significant. Life starts to become a little bit more important than volleyball, or academics take the forefront. A number of reasons on an individual's scenario that would mandate it, but I'd say for the top end of the roster, they stay for a longer period of time than the bottom one. So again, all those factors kind of influence the recruiting process, but it's becoming a much more competitive environment, and I think our friends down south are making it even more competitive, where they're going at it at an earlier age, which is forcing families to make those educated decisions earlier, gather information earlier. So all those things are starting to really factor into the recruiting science.
So it sounds like so what I picture is you got a big one wall in your office is just full of all your athletes, got years beside them. You've got what do I need in 2024, 2025, and it's just you just stare at that wall every morning for half an hour to 45 minutes and say, okay, what am I looking at? What do I got to do? Like, it sounds like you guys you have to be thinking about it all the time. You can't just be waiting until provincials or nationals. You got to be thinking all the time. You got to be thinking more than 1 year at a time as well. You got to be thinking long term. It sounds like it takes up a lot of your day. Does that make sense, or is that correct?
Yeah, I'll jump in here, Doug, before you go. I wouldn't say I'm every day consumed by it. I think there's big picture, overarching stuff. I'm much more consumed with the ones I have in my gym than the ones I don't. So I need to make sure I take care. In my mind, recruit, retain, develop. Right? There's 3 aspects to it. So I can get them there, but if I don't do anything with them or keep them there, then it's just recruit, and that's just way too much work. So I think there's a process to it where you recruit the best fit, and we'll talk about that later. But then you got to keep them there. So you got to make them academically successful, and then develop them so they're volleyball successful. So I think there's a little bit more to it than just staring at a whiteboard full of initials.
Glad Dave said that, because I was going to jump in the same. If you look at the length of our youth sports schedule most years, like we're starting right about now, and national championships are in mid-March. And it's in some ways too long, but it prevents doing as much active recruiting. And, you just, frankly, you want to work. I think the majority of youth sport coaches didn't get into it to recruit and be really great recruiters. They want to coach. So in some ways it's a necessary evil. I enjoy it. I enjoy meeting parents and kids and talking to coaches, but I don't want to spend in any way, shape, or form too much time doing it. And because I want to train my players and take it from there. So I think I agree with Dave. I mean, obviously different coaches are going to have different approaches, and that's something for people to be aware of too. There's probably a fairly big range. Dave made a couple of excellent points, I thought, early on too, just in terms of roster management and the changes that can happen there. And just to put a little different, we've actually had some of our top end players leave to go play pro, like national team level players. So that is something that has only happened in the last few years, never ever happened before. The other thing that we've faced in a number of other programs that can change things fairly quickly, can change your planning, is just injuries, So, for example, in our program, 4 ACL injuries, and way more athletes actually coming into our program that are injured. So it's not just that they're injured in their last year, they're injured almost from the get-go. And so that forces what Dave was talking about too, maybe taking a slightly expanded roster. So again, these are individual.
Cool. So both you guys have had, and Brenda, you as well, have had successful programs. How does it work for, and you may not know this, but I'm just curious, for those programs that are not at the top of the pack, where they are looking at those blue chippers and things like that, like how do they recruit, or is it any different than what you guys have to do, or your thought process as well? Like, I mean, those schools that are, you're looking at schools that are far out or smaller schools, do they have much different scenarios than you guys have in terms of recruiting or planning their recruiting?
Well, I can't speak on their behalf, Colin, at all, but I do know that the competitiveness of recruiting right now is probably, in my 28-year career, it's as competitive as it's ever been. And I think regardless of the size of the program, I think every coach knows what they have to offer and what they're looking for. And I think that's what I talked before about the fit. So some schools have a tremendous amount of scholarship money that they may be able to offer, and they use that for attraction. Other ones have tremendous academic programs or very tailored academic programs. So I think it's really important that the coach knows, and I think every coach does, what their enhancements are, what makes my program different than the others. And then I think it's really important that you seek out the athletes that fit that. So I don't like to cast a net and go down a list of okay, I need a left side and here's the 9 best in the country. I have a saying, when I'm recruiting, is that talent will get you noticed, but character will get you recruited. And so I'm looking for, yes, a level of talent. I know the level that we want to play at, but the difference makers for me are the characters, the academics, that kind of stuff. So I would love a gym full of talent. I think that would be great. But I know that may not work at McMaster. I know what my fit is. It's a high academic school, and I know that the bandwidth of athlete that I want to work with and the ones that are capable of studying at that level is going to be pretty slim. So I have to do my work on the front end rather on the back. The other saying in recruiting is you recruit your own problems, right? So if I recruit somebody who's going to be marginal in terms of getting them in, right on the academic threshold, then I know that I'm going to have a lot of work to do to keep them on that and really, babysit that academic side of things. Or I can go the other way and make sure I do my homework and know that these academic All-Canadians are going to be fine. I don't have to worry about that, but perhaps that's on the development side of things. So, I think I think it's got to be a fit. So I don't know if the smaller schools recruit differently than the big schools, or the rich schools recruit differently than the schools who don't have as much scholarship money. I just think it's really important that each coach recruits the way it fits.
I can maybe add, excuse me, one thing. I do know that there are a few coaches in the OUA, certainly, who recognize that those blue chippers are not likely to come to their school because they want to play for a top team. And they tend to visit the championship level of tournaments as opposed to the premier level of tournaments because there are some, quote, blue chip potential, one on a team that doesn't have a lot of talent. And if they can secure one from here and one from there, it can really up their program. And they think they have a better crack at those people. So that's about the only thing I would add that's a bit different perhaps than Dave, Doug, or I would normally target.
Doug, do you have anything to add? I mean, it's different out west too, so.
Oh, we're not that different. Yeah, I mean, just mainly echoing the comments, like, I guess recruiting, I'll echo Dave's thing just generally, like recruiting I'd say is getting harder, not easier. That's the competition points that he made earlier. I would say just way better quality of coaching across the country and way more competition, or the competition still stays there south of the border. And the other thing from a university coach point of view that really complicates it is that it is so much easier now to for any athlete just to fire out info and fire it out a lot. So you're inundated with, information, and I can't really tell right away an athlete from Ontario maybe how good they are. So it's going to take some work and research to figure that out. And so, you know, and because athletes are looking probably for answers more quickly, and just that connection a lot, I'd say the pressures on post-secondary coaches have grown a fair bit, and probably at bigger schools that may be more the case. I'm not sure, but I just know my inbox is fairly full with athletes, and often you aren't even sure exactly how widely they're spreading, how many schools they're actually targeting. So that, can complicate things as well. I'll pause.
No, that's good information. It's, I mean, one of the things that I've learned this year with the 18U girls is that there's more opportunity. Like when you're in Ontario, you think of Ontario, and then you might think out west. But now we have to think out east as well, and so we have a couple girls going out east, and that's spreading their opportunities out for female athletes anyways. On the male side, pretty much out east, you're going to have to be either French or Vball or New Brunswick still. But it's interesting, like you said, it's now I can connect with every one of those coaches from BC all the way to Newfoundland because of technology. So that's one thing athletes need, I think, take into consideration, is that they are able to communicate with a lot, but just because more doesn't make it better. It doesn't give you more chances as well, right? I mean, I think what you guys are all saying, it has to be a fit. And I think when we get with Brenda at the end, when we really talk about athletes really making good choices on how to find the right fit, is going to be important. What I want to do is move to the next question now, and you guys have sort of started to answer it, and I'll put both questions together. So my question is, what do you look for in an athlete? You guys have sort of generally said it, but maybe even give us some specifics, if some scenarios or situations you've been in where you were looking for a specific thing. And then the big one, I think, for athletes and coaches is, how do you determine these characteristics in the athlete? So Doug, you said you got to do your research, your homework. What does that entail? What does that mean? What does it look like for you guys to do that, so that you do your due diligence to make sure the fit is right on your end as well? And Dave, Doug, you're up. Your face is up first on the video screen, so why don't you go first? Okay.
Some of that hasn't changed very much in the 30 years I've been doing this, plus years. Because as Dave said, you need talent. You're going to need some talent in the gym. And so maybe in each province, there's a few athletes that you're going to see at the provincial club championship that every post-secondary coach or any coach on this call would go, yeah, kind of want that individual, right? But that number is not very big in any year. And for probably each level of university, what Brenda was getting at is accurate. They may target a certain level, but just speaking for our program, we want to be competitive with the best teams in the country. We want to try and attract the best athletes. So that's one category of athlete. We are going to explore that, and then dial into the academic component, because at UBC it is not easy. It's a strong academic school. So Dave's comments there we're bang on in that regard, because that would be how I would start any conversations. There's no sense going down a path if this athlete isn't going to be able to cut it academically. It is not in their interest either to try and do it, not just in terms of recruiting. What was your line, Dave? Recruiting your problems, something like that. So we're going to look academics, and that's kind of a bit the first stage. And we're matching that up with what do we actually need in our roster. So that's one category. Let's call it blue chip. So we're going to go that direction, but we're not going to fill our roster that way. So then we've got athletes that have contacted us, or we've looked and gone, well, might be a little bit undersized. could do it. Arm swing isn't great, but got these other characteristics. And that's where I think you got to dial in on where are they going to, can they make those contributions? Is this going to be a good fit? I know that's an overused term, but it is still the best one I'd come to. In other words, within the roster that we've got and what we do, can this player be, contribute? I will say that over time, because I've been humbled by making incorrect decisions or incorrect predictions about where athletes have gone, I offer less and less promises about where an athlete is going to end up once I get past maybe that real, potential superstar stud. And even there, sometimes the best player in that province cannot make a transition well to university life. There is some aspect that has been a block. And I quote those examples to parents and to athletes when I do talk to them in both directions. In other words, even if they're a strong athlete, I'll go, listen, I'm not gonna, I don't go down that route about playing time, etc., because there's just so many different ways that this could go awry. And I have images of athletes that have vastly overachieved during their time at our program, and athletes that never achieved the potential that every one of their coaches or even I thought they would achieve in university. So it is by no means anyway an exact science or anywhere close to it. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave. Then I'll get to your next part.
Yeah, when the best in the country speaks at it, you just concur. I'm in the same boat. The amount of blue chips that are available that every program is going after is becoming less and less. And unfortunately, there's other leagues that influence this too, right? Like the NCAA or direct national teams. So there's other components to, the better athletes get, sometimes the less access there is. So I think getting the right fit to that, I call them baby blues, right? You got your blue chips and then you have your baby blues. And so in those baby blues, where are they? How do they fit with what we currently have? How can I make that work? And quite honestly, that's why I end up carrying 18, is because you're trying to put together a puzzle, and along with development, those puzzle pieces are changing. And so you're trying to forecast a year out of, I think this person can get to this level, and therefore I'm going to need somebody to fill in this. And then whether they do or don't changes what actually needs to be recruited. So I like Doug, I make no promises. I think the student athlete has a lot more to do with what their success and playing time is going to be determined than me. I think it's really important that the student athletes I'm talking to understand what our culture is and how they can influence their own playing time and what opportunities they're going to have to do that and who they're going to have to do that with every day. And so I think that's probably pretty important, because some athletes I talk to, there's a couple of schools of thought here. Some athletes I talk to don't want to compete for a spot every day. They need the security of knowing that that's my spot. I'm the P2, I'm the M1, I'm the starter, and they need that security. And then there's others who are like, I'll fight for it every day. I'm good with this. I know this is going to make me better. This is my personality. And so it's up to me to do my homework on the front end to make sure that the athletes who we're getting understand what the culture of our gym is going to be like and which of those two environments they fit best in. And then I think the other determining factor is the ones that are, I've noticed that either club directors or coaches are starting to provide templates to students who are reaching out, because I can almost tell now that the template is coming from a certain area. And they're good, and they provide all the right information. The ones I'm not enamored with tremendously are the ones that start off with, how much money can I get for a scholarship? So those ones usually work to their way to the bottom of the pile quicker than the other ones do. I don't like people saying, what can you do for me right off the hop? I want to get to know the person, and then we can determine what kind of support we can invest in their development from a tuition point of view or that kind of stuff. So I come from a school, a coach at a school that doesn't have a tremendous amount of scholarship money. So those conversations right off the bat turn me off a little bit, because we have to make the best of what we have if we don't always have the best. And so I think right now, the money conversation, as important they are to a family, as important they are to a recruit, if they're leading a conversation, sometimes it's a little bit of a flag for me. So the ones that have to have the security, and I need my spot, and I have to have a full scholarship, and those are the ones that often I'll continue to look.
Yeah, I would often flip the conversation when they said, where do you see me fitting in? Would I start? And I would say, well, you know, your development will determine whether you start, but I'm going to ask the reverse question. Well, first of all, what are your goals? But on the other end of the what are your goals is the question of, if based on what's around you, you ended up being kind of a first off the bench or whatever, all the way through, how would you respond to that? You know, it's interesting to know there are certain athletes that are, well, I wouldn't necessarily want that role, but if that's the role I'm assigned, I'm going to work my butt off to do it as well as I can and try to expand it. But, you know, there's different responses from different athletes to that question. It's an uncomfortable kind of question.
That's a really hard, like, I think it's a really hard thing for the athletes to know, because they've always been, likely, if they're playing at a top program, you know, they've never come off the bench unless it's on like a national team program, you know, mm-hmm. So they have no experience in that regard. And so I think there's sometimes a little bit of a education, sometimes it's a bit of a dance around those kind of, you know, areas. I really encourage them to reach out to, as they're getting more info, you know, to even former players, like players that aren't even on our program anymore, if they need, or athletes. Like, I don't coach our athletes, because I really think for them to make good decisions, they need, you know, if they're going to 2, 3, 4 different coaches and hearing similar things, hopefully that's educating them on what the transition and the jump will be like. And I think that's what's behind, I was saying earlier, on some of the challenges some individuals have had, and I don't blame them necessarily. It's just all of a sudden it can be a straight volleyball factor that, you know, let's pick serve receive, you're an outside hitter. We've only been able to see them play on little narrow sport courts where don't even have 2 meters to serve. And serve receive is a completely different skill in a big gym where the ball's coming a lot harder. So how can, you know, don't really know yet how they're going to develop, you know, over that time period. So again, I'll pivot it back like to the comments on, that's a bit the, you know, trying to get a sense of the maturity and the character that's behind it. Are they going to be able to have a little resilience as they work through that for maybe two years, right? And the time frame that most high school and club athletes have looking at is they want to know what club they're playing for right now, and how does that do? And it does not extend beyond that. So you start talking to a 17, 18-year-old about 5-year windows, and their eyes are going to glaze over. But that's actually what we're worried about, right? So Colin, you spent time preparing questions, and I started and they kind of ignored it. So yeah, what do we actually...
Hey, I just want to jump into one thing, because I just want to piggyback off of what Doug said last time too, because you talk about a talent level that way of the serve receive and stuff, but I also get the comments in the recruiting letters about I'm an excellent leader. I've got excellent leadership skills and all that kind of stuff. And I often, you know, I've only done it on a couple occasions, but I actually turned a question on the young man saying, well, you think you're going to come into our gym in your first year and lead us? We have a team full of MVPs who are the most valuable players on their team, student athletes of the year at their schools, provincial team, youth national team, and you think or are you going to be able to come in and follow for a little bit? Are you actually just going to help our team, or you need that leadership? Because, you know, you got to understand what you're walking into as well. And I understand you got great leadership skills, but that doesn't always equate to the situation you're walking into, when the first couple of years you might have to earn it. And I don't think sometimes it doesn't happen or doesn't stop having to earn it after your first couple of years. So I just want them to be aware that really if we're doing our homework to that level, they should too.
Yeah, so they got to emphasize that they're a team player and they're willing to take on roles and be adaptable, so that you're looking more for that. And that's sort of getting what I was looking for, since Doug just avoided the question. But I'm looking for those types of things. Like, those are the things you're going to look for, those characteristics, those character traits in an athlete. Now, my question is, how do you do that from a video? How do you, like, we're always telling our athletes, hey, if you think no one's watching you right now when you're sitting on the bench, people are watching you right now. Is that true?
Absolutely. And I'm going to let a couple trade secrets out today, and could end up biting me in the butt. But the reality of it is, I really like going to multi-court tournaments. Nationals is a perfect opportunity. Our provincial championships here in Ontario are a great opportunity that way too, where there's multi-courts. And oftentimes I'll watch a match from 2 courts over, because I don't necessarily want them to know that I'm watching it. And so I'll see the young man toss his water bottle to his mom to go fill it up and not say please or thank you. Those are flags for me. I want character. I don't want to have to worry about these young men when they're coming into our gym. So I want them to operate with integrity and respect and pursue excellence. So I often watch matches from 2 courts over, so that I can see the way somebody reacts. I think the first 15 minutes in the gym, everybody understands who the most talented people are. But I think that's one reason why it's really difficult to recruit cross country as well, is because it's really hard to assess character through a highlight film. You know, I heard another coaching cliche that says nobody ever misses a shot on a highlight tape. So you got to watch game film. You got to see how they react in those points that are good and bad, and how they react to teammates who make good and bad plays, and how they react to coaches and timeouts. And those are a lot of the things that, and sometimes you can't do that in a tournament, Colin. So it takes 2, 3, 5, 15 times to see these people over a period of time to evaluate that character. I can't go into a gym and I can see the talent, but I can't evaluate the character once. So it takes a little bit of time, but they call it work for a reason. And you're going to do it on the front end, or you're going to do it on the back end if you get the wrong people in your gym. Thanks.
Doug, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I'm going to go actually back to your question, because I covered a little bit of it, and I'm going to just talk for a little bit on just the things, I think a number of university coaches look for, at least on the women's side. And so it's been a little bit beyond that blue, if you go just below that blue chip athlete, to the ones that have expressed interest and are close, that's a bigger group. Ones that could do it in our conference or at the national level. Like, so that group is bigger, and that's where we spend the most time trying to figure it out. Who is the best person or 2 people, let's say, that we are looking to recruit or to keep going? And so some of it's going to be skill level, and you're going to factor that in, but that's not just it. To me, I'm also looking very much, and it'll depend a little bit positionally, but you want that overall athleticism, the ability to move, and they just, kind of look athletic. And I think it's important for coaches to know that you're going to have athletes that maybe, I'm not going to say, they may have worked their butts off for years, and they're in grade 11, and they have maybe plateaued a little bit, right? And it could be a little bit harder for them, and they may not understand why a different athlete was selected, because we think that come 3rd year university, this individual will pass them as just an overall athlete. So the eye work that I'm trying to do when I'm watching athlete is in at that national championships, let's say, is going, okay, with training, how would this person do? And where are the biggest gaps here? So for middle blockers, sudden instead, their blocking movement and their position stuff is going to become a lot more complex and difficult. The offense is going faster. There's more hitters that are attacking the ball. So they have to be good. So we're looking at some base stuff there and making sure there isn't some real, I would say, habits that are going to be really tough to break. Let's take a couple of other key things. I've talked a little bit about ball handling, ball control at a higher level. Even that can be hard to assess in their environment. But then we're looking who can be attacking the ball at a high enough level, potentially have enough velocity so that, again, with training could get better. So some of those I think you guys know. So who's going to hit hard, who's going to move well, all those things are factors without question. And then we're going to dial in a little bit more to some of the other aspects that Dave talked about. And it can be really challenging because a lot of times I don't get to see them, multiple times. So I'm going to have to rely on other avenues to assess that I think we can probably dive into a little bit more. But, Dave's examples I think are very valuable. And I think a lot of coaches want to do that. So if we're looking at somebody, we're going to want to see them both when things are going okay and especially when things aren't going very well for their team or for them individually. That's the piece I'm really going to look at. I'm going to also look and go increasingly, if they make an error, how do they react and where do they look? Are they always looking at the coach, as an example? To me, that's a bit of a red flag. But then I assess, is that the culture of that club team, or, like that could be just the way that group goes. So now I've got to dial in a little bit longer and go, is everybody doing that? And maybe that's the coach's issue, not the player's issue. Okay. So just sometimes you spend as much time watching in between plays as you do the actual play. Or I'll watch their reaction from blocking if they didn't make the right read or the right movement, and how do they handle that. So, I think our challenge as university coaches in a short period of time is to narrow it down as much as possible who we're going to look at in those environments so we can have a more complete look. So increasingly on our side, I'll bring 3 to 4, our whole coaching staff will go to national championships. So we've got 4 people looking at them, not just, let's say, myself as well, to get more looks, and more time and more opinions.
Just thinking on that one, like, do you guys have, I'm picturing, some type of psychological testing, characteristic traits you have written on paper and you're marking them out, or is it just simply just taking notes on your own? And then the other one was, I'm thinking, if I'm a player and I want to show you what type of athlete I am, I might be better off to send you video of me in practice, send you a practice tape there versus a game tape. In terms of, again, not a highlight practice, but something where I can show you, I can edit out the warm up, but maybe I want to show you the warm up. I want to show you what my dedication is. As an athlete, do you get many of those? And would you think would that benefit an athlete if they showed you that they want to show you what their work ethic is like by sending you practice tapes? I'll leave it for both of you guys.
Yeah, it doesn't happen that often, but I did get one just yesterday, as a matter of fact, like shorter, 5 minutes. But in part, I think because nobody, we can talk COVID, pre-COVID recruiting and post-COVID or during COVID recruiting, and those are different beasts, so that's part of it. So to be honest, the highlight tape gives you a feel. Additional video, we will reach out and go, do you have some game tape? Do you have, or practice tape if it's done? Like if it's, like literally you could, I think it's a great idea, Colin, because you could get, let's say you're looking at that middle blocker example, and you just set up a drill that's live. So the ones that are useless to me are ones where it's like the coach is tossing a ball, basically. So after one rep of that, I've seen enough. I don't need to see 33 reps of that, but I could see 33 reps of a virus type drill where there's a live passer, live setter with wing hitters, let's say, and I'm watching that middle blocker make decisions and move, right? And especially if I can see their eye work at the same time. You know, in Zoom land now, what we've been doing with some of our recruits is we actually went through some of their video with them. Here's what we see, and here's what we think you got to get better at if you want to think the next level. And you know, that's been interesting. Don't inundate me with that, because it actually takes a long time to prep and to do. But you know, that kind of piece I think could be really helpful, and might be one that even for club coaches, you know, I wouldn't even mind. I'd have no problem with the club coach joining that kind of, you know, discussion too. So I think, yeah, more time in practice would be good.
Yeah, I think it, just on top of my head, it just starts causing, I mean, I think it would benefit the whole team itself if they start videotaping practice, because now they got to look at practice and look at that and see where the process is occurring versus just looking at game film.
Just to jump in real quick, like there's times you're going to watch a match or video and there's a poor middle blocker and the passing isn't good enough and you never get to see him actually attack a ball. Yeah. Or they're playing a team that they're winning easily and you never actually see the other team in system. So I can't actually assess their abilities as a middle blocker.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I could see, yeah, it's just the more and more I think about it, the more and more I would say I would probably more prefer to see more of that type of gameplay action in practice, because you're going to get way more opportunities to see things happening at live speed. So
also,
quicker.
Colin, I think we're pretty lucky in Ontario with the HPC. For me, that was a huge way of evaluating character. I went every single year while I was still actively coaching, because that's a 6 or 7, now it's up to like 9 days where you get to see them interact on and off the court. You get to coach them and see if they're coachable and how they respond, how they make changes. The competition element is there. So for me, that's like a mini season in a week, and a really great opportunity to scratch kids off the list. You know, I'm not there to like actually recruit, but it's a great opportunity to go, I don't have any use for that kid. Like, that's just a very self-centered kid, that type of thing. So that's one way that I would evaluate character.
Right. Dave, anything to add?
No, just, you know, I know we're kind of jumping around a little bit, but that's what happens around kitchen tables, right? So for me, you know, getting back to Doug's point, fundamentals are always the most important. So serving and passing is one of the things we're always trying to add to our program. Some of, you know, filling in the gaps, but, you know, ball control and serving is always the most important thing. So when I'm talking with our staff about recruiting or talking about club coaches, I'll say, give me a list of the top 5 servers in the province or wherever we're at. And then we go take a look and really kind of evaluate that. And, or who are the 5 best passers? Who are the 5 best high ball hitters? And then how many of those actually fit into our realm? So, you know, as Doug mentioned, footwork for middles is huge. Hi, Kenny Cron. Speaking of one of the best middles ever.
A little undersized.
Yeah, well, and he made up for that.
Married well though. He married a Westman alumni.
Footwork for middles, high ball management, or you know, termination hitting from an opposite, reception from an outside hitter, serving, you know, and then obviously we get into setter specific stuff. But there's no doubt we always look for that stuff, and then it starts to escalate to the next level of, okay, now how do they fit in our gym?
Before you go to that, because I want to know, because I'm a big growth mindset guy, when you're looking at passive receivers, are you looking at technique, or are you looking at result, or are you looking at both, or are you more saying, hey, they've got the technique, the result's not quite there, but with more repetition, they're going to get there, and as Doug said, 3 to 5 years, I can see them being able to handle that serve from the entire, from a big gym scenario versus what we are now? Because there's some guys that can pass just simply because they found a way to do it, but
absolutely. I coached one of the best ones ever with Andrew Richards. He passes like a tennis player because he grew up being a tennis player. So everything was short levers to his sides, and he passed it like he was swinging a tennis racket because that's what he did. There wasn't 1 second of my work with him where I thought about changing that. He was brilliant at what he was doing. I didn't want to change that. Would I teach that in a camp? Absolutely not, but he did it. So I think it's we talk about fit, and that's, the one thing I've learned in almost as coaching as long as Doug is that there's never one way to do anything. And just because somebody does it some way doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has to do it that way.
So consistency of the way they do it, right? It's
absolutely. Now there are some standards and there's some principles, the footwork and the body posture and a whole bunch of different stuff. But if I don't need to fix it, I guess the question is going to be, how far will that go? At what point will that break it down? Right. So if Andrew's passing in here, how big of a seam is he going to be able to take? Because it's always in here. Right. So there's always limits to whatever we do. And it's my job to kind of help figure some of that stuff out. But I know that there's never one way to do anything. So, I'm looking for a little bit of result, Colin, but I'm also looking for, that technique looks really good. Maybe they're just not getting the results yet. Maybe they need a couple 3,000 more reps on that, and we can provide that over a course of 5 years. So those are the gaps that I think Doug was talking about earlier about forecasting a little bit. And maybe they're not the best passer in the gym right now, but do they have the capacity to be in 2 years? Right. And those are, that's the art of it. We talked about the science of it. Now it's the art of it. And are we going to be able to have enough reps to get that person to where they are by the time they leave, or am I going to run out of eligibility?
Right. Yeah, I think that's important. It's important for athletes to recognize too, is that the university coach doesn't scratch you off their list because you didn't pass 4 threes in a row.
Absolutely.
They're not looking at, they're looking at that, but they're more looking at the technique. Was the technique the same of all 4 of those passes? Then we know we've got some consistency and motor coordination down. Now we can work on results after that.
And perhaps, Colin, your reaction to when you didn't pass those 4 in a row that you probably thought you did, or you should have. How did you handle that? Right. So yeah, maybe you should have, but you didn't. And so what was your response to that? That shows a little bit of coachability, even though I haven't had you in my gym yet.
Right. Good. Sorry, and I cut you off. You're gonna add something? You forgot, I bet. But
me?
Yep.
No, man, I'm good. I'm just waiting for Doug to say something else that I can learn from.
Yeah, right.
Good one. How much do you guys spend talking to their coach in terms of those character traits? Not necessarily the technique, maybe so much, but I know the conversation I had this year, some of it was about, where do you see the coach? Where do you see this athlete in 2 to 3 years? Can they handle the next level? And that type of question. Do you guys do that? I guess it depends on who the coach is, but how much and what do you talk to coaches about?
You waiting on me, Doug?
I'm not pointing at you. You're that way. One of you guys, go ahead.
Yeah, I do. I try to as much as I can, Colin. Some of them I don't know, so I have to, introduce myself, and they may not know me, so I got to talk to them and establish a relationship with those coaches. And if I don't know that coach, because I know a lot of coaches are just advocating right now, right? They're selling athletes. They're promoting athletes. So you may not always get the most accurate answer, or more sometimes they tell you what you want to hear. But I think having been in the league for enough years now, I got a network of people who I do trust. And I'd say, hey, there's a young person in your area, and what can you tell me about them? And although it's their perspective, and they may not have been in the same gym, they're usually pretty accurate about what it's like. Right? Because so Thankfully, we do have a pretty good network across the country, and we can kind of tap into some of that stuff. But I think those conversations are really good. I also try, if I can connect the parents, I always do what every other coach does. You watch the kid walk off the court and see where they're walking to mom and dad. And then we got to isolate who mom and dad are. And then we can try and talk to them later on. Or, if we don't have the formal introduction, all the spy techniques that coaches use. But we have to try and amass as much information, especially when we're not as familiar with them. Either they're coming from across the country, or they're just starting to work their way onto the list. And that list, Colin, is getting younger and younger every year, right? Like grade 10s. When I started coaching 28 years ago, I never talked to a grade 10. And the problem with grade 10s in Canada right now is they're even playing on a lower height net. So they're not even playing on a men's height net. They're playing a completely different game. So serving and passing, everything changes at that stage. So, but that's the way recruiting's going right now. And so I haven't talked to a grade 8 yet. I haven't yet, Doug. So you're ahead of me there. But
I haven't.
I
just didn't answer the email.
Yeah, I've had grade 9s and the odd grade 10. But there's obviously exceptions that the grade 10s that are playing up and all that other kind of stuff. But I got an email the other day from a young man who's coming in 2025. Come on, man. So I haven't answered that one yet.
We'll get back to him in a couple of years.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to wrap up this questioning line. Well, two things. One I want to know is, can you sort of explain when you say, Dave, you talk about scholarship money and you don't have a lot. What can you give us sort of a general idea to the athletes and coaches? What can they expect in terms of being offered stuff, in terms of sort of generalities?
Well, I think that's every program has their own set of resources that they can provide. We try and provide good development opportunities. So if you're coming into our gym, we're going to try and make you better. I think everybody has that. I don't think that separates us. We try and have at least 2 good non-conference competitions to enhance our league structure every year. So whether we go to Europe or whether we go to California or we bring those teams in, we try and make our non-conference schedule as difficult as possible so that we get really good opportunities to compete there. And then that the other thing I say a lot in our recruiting process is that if we can't give you money, we'll spend money on you, right? So that's in terms of program enhancements, like shoes, travel gear, catered meals on the road, that type of stuff. So there's certain program enhancements that we can help with that go over and above what our scholarship money is. Obviously, like every other school, there's bursaries and other things that are available. I don't think that separates us. So we just try and find the things that we can add value to invest in that student athlete's development.
Good. Doug, you guys, and yes, maybe also for Doug, and we'll come back to Dave on this. So just the rules around out west versus OUA, like what type of restrictions do you guys have to follow?
Yeah, well, I'll just give you ours. So we're allowed to provide financial support up to tuition and some of the fees. Okay, so that's the athletic scholarship portion that's allowed within U Sport regulations. So not every one of our athletes is going to get all of that. We don't have a big enough scholarship budget right now to do that. And I try and actually keep the range that I provide to the athletes very narrow by and large, so that there isn't a big gap. And that funnels back to the earlier comments just about the uncertainty of where it's going. I make basically same guarantee, this amount will not go down in the 4 or 5 years you're with the program. It will only go up, and that's going to be based on our fundraising ability. That's going to be based on what that budget is and how you know, I'm going to try and raise this, especially if tuition increases. So then I have frank discussions with the parents just about this is what it looks like. Grade 12 is the toughest year because they don't really have much time. So after that, depending on the athlete, you know, most of them, if they're going back home, like I don't demand that athletes stay. Let's say if they were coming from Ontario as an example, they can go back home. They can be working through that time, especially if they're not playing volleyball. Similar to Dave. So, you know, because we can't offer everything, we don't spend a lot of time talking about the financial side of things, because if they're comparing, let's say, to an NCAA offer or other places, we can't offer as much. So what I'm trying to sensitize the athlete, but also the family to is this the best overall decision for you? So academically, what do you want to achieve, and where do you want to be at the end of that? Inability to what you want to, I don't even want answers about career, but in school that might lead you, by and large now, you need some postgraduate education for most professions. So that would be another change, you know, from maybe 25, 30 years ago, possibly. At UBC, we're attracting along strong academic students. So it's like, okay, I want to do this, and this is why. They're coming with that. So we're answering that, and we're talking about our ability as a program to support them as students and as athletes. So that's going to be very important in terms of what we do. We're going to talk about, if you're moving from like in Ontario, is this going to work for you? Like, do you think you can actually do that? Because I'll say, this goes up and down, but we've had a number of athletes. Ontario's, you know, a lot of very good female players, but a number of them this year, for example, that we were recruiting, chose to stay close to home. They didn't want to either leave the province or move too far away. So we're trying to get a sense around that. Are you going to be happy? And sometimes the way I phrase it is, heaven forbid somebody gets hurt, right? You're hurt and you're not capable of playing for a year. Will you be happy attending school and rehabbing in this city at this university, taking this academic program? And so I try and get them to have a little pause around that, you know, just to make sure they're considering where I am, because I'm, you know, in Canada, I kind of like your system. Like, we are students and athletes. You're going to do both here. And I'm making zero apologies for that. If they're comparing that, well, this is what I'm going to get at the university of wherever down south, I'm like, yeah, it's going to be different. So you're choosing, you know, it's not a direct comparison. And but you know, we can get into that discussion probably in a longer thing, but that's kind of the approach. Let's look at those top 4 to 5 things that are really important. Probably the one I didn't mention is where we'll go through the roster. I encourage them to go through the roster and take a look at it, and where they could see themselves being, and asking any questions to us around that. Okay. So this won't occur until after they've had a campus visit, right? Till they've seen the school, till our players have met and talked with them, you know, they've met the coaching staff. So that's at that kind of level. I got to pause for just 1 second.
Are those visits paid for, or do they pay for that themselves?
Most of the time they're paid for, because we narrow down.
Okay. And Dave, what about you?
Well, currently, according to OUA regulations, we're allowed to give up to $4,500 a year, which is perceived to be less than the rest of the country. But the reality of it is, based on the tuition at our school specifically, if a student athlete reduced their course load to take a 4-year degree over 5 years, which a lot of them do, it actually covers their tuition. So it's around the same. It's not that far off. So I know a lot of times the term tuition and fees gets comparative to the cap in Ontario at $4,500, but the actual value number is not that far off from each other. The fees part is a little different, because the 4,500 gets capped. But yeah, I would say that, you know, the process that Doug described is exactly what we're looking at. The only thing I would suggest is that on the men's side, the draw down south isn't as big as it is on the women's side. It's getting to be as much. But I do think that they're very different leagues, and Canada offers a very different product. It's very much a developmental league. We are not restricted to the number of hours we can train our athletes. We are not restricted to the number of competitions we can have. You know, there's a lot more to the student athlete development side on north of the border. So, you know, I think, you know, everybody makes decisions for their own reasons. There's no doubt about that. But the reality of it is the Canadian men's development side, and I think the comparatives to the top 5-10 teams in the US and the top 5-10 teams in Canada on the men's side is a statement to that. You know, so I think those two leagues kind of equate themselves a little bit different. Now, we're still in the last 3 or 4, probably 5 years, we still have lost some of the blue chips down south. But prior to that, it was pretty good. We kept quite a few of them here. So we'll continue to fight that battle. But you know, in terms of the Canadian side of things, I think there's a lot of really good programs out there offering a lot of really good resources. And I think it's a statement that our men's national team is doing as well as they are right now with that many U Sports, CIAU, and CIS products. So.
Sure. And I think families also have to factor in the cost of flights. Dave's absolutely right. 4,500 does turn out comparable, especially when you add the flight to get out there in the fall, home at Christmas, back out in January, and so on. You're probably adding close to $2,000 in many cases. So,
right. And Doug, I got a question because talking with the NCAA, why do we not see more? I guess maybe because it's a season. Women's teams playing the NCAA teams like we do with the men's. To me, that I don't know. I would think recruiting wise, it makes it when we see that our U sport teams are beating or competing for 5 set matches. As an athlete, I'm going, well, why would I go down there? Other than the thrill of going down there or playing in California, which I could see the attraction of that, but other than that, I see us. Well, I'm going to get just as good as volleyball up here. Whereas I think some females perceive that the volleyball in the States is better, so that that might be a drawing point right now. Is that true? I guess is number one, and number two, why do we not compete with them?
Well, to start with that one, we don't compete with them because of the schedules, right? Like their competitive schedules. So they start. Like if they were playing this year, they would have started training on August the 8th, right? And they can only train, and they have very limited, and now if they're in a bigger conference, they've only got a few matches that extra matches they can play. And those extra matches have to occur on the same day. So that's why you see them playing 2 to 3 tournaments, and a lot of the teams will play twice in a day just to get the volume of matches. So for a lot of NCAA coaches, they need to, and they are carefully structuring that competitive thing. So for the top handful of schools don't give a rip, right? Stanford doesn't care. Nebraska doesn't care. They just want good matches in front of lots of people, right? But if you dip below, 25, 30, I'm just making that up, but there's 300 programs, right? To me, it's crazy, but one of the primary thing that lets you keep your job as an NCAA coach, at least in women's volleyball, is to get to 20 wins. So they're going to look and go, where do I fit in a conference schedule? And I'm going to win about 15, 16 here. And then I'm going to get a few more here in these non-conference. And when they play a Canadian school, because those matches do not count. Okay. So they're not counting in their competitive record. So very few schools, some of the top schools wouldn't mind, but why would they play us if they can play, if they can play in front of Nebraska in front of, 15,000 people? They're going to choose that. Like, what's a better draw for their program? Like, and their kids, what Dave talked about, right? And so, I'll give you an example. Like, we go around in California a fair bit, and they'll say, they'll say, do you want to play? Like, I'll go, Pepperdine, like Pepperdine willing to play us, but can you come a week earlier? And I'm like, no, I can't drive my kids, like get them back here on August the 24th, you know, with no practices to play you. That's not good for our program. And then we've had other times where we, let's say the fourth team in a tournament, the weakest of the four teams has just said, no, we don't want to do that. Like they'll have looked a couple, you know, years out because they need a weak team that they can count in their win record. So that's one of the things. So scheduling just doesn't work and we don't help them that much. So there's times we get some, you know, some matches that way, but that's the basic reason. And the other part of yours is the level different? Like the men's volleyball level is closer, Canada to the US, than the top programs. So I'll just be honest, like the level that if you're watching like the Elite Eight in women's volleyball, it's just my opinion, like physically, we don't have enough players that can compete at that level, right? So top U Sport teams could, you know, win matches probably in every conference, you know, depending on the year, but we'd be top couple of conferences, we'd be finishing closer to the bottom. So, you know, they're just too big, too physical.
Is that just because they have so much more athletes available to them, that their pool is way more bigger, so they're able to house them with more bigger programs?
And scholarship money to recruit international athletes.
Totally.
So not only do they have 10 times the population we do, they also have 10 times the recruiting budget to recruit the international athletes on top of the 10 times that they have. So yeah, and when you start to talk about economies of scale, it starts to tip pretty quick.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. So the best program, they will go wherever, whatever to, you know, they don't have a P1, they're going to find a P1 somewhere.
A good friend of mine coaches in NCAA women, one of the top schools in the country. And he instructed his assistant, go find me the best middle player you can in the world. And he did. And his assistant went to Europe and everywhere else to go find the best middle player that he could find in the world. So that conversation didn't have a lot of parallels to my reality.
Yeah, money talks.
Yeah.
All right, I want to finish this section off with one question. And then, Doug, the way I'm going to phrase this, you're going to have to take out the Ottawa U part that I'm going to put in, just so Lionel doesn't get upset. If you have to take off your jacket now and you're no longer coaching your successful programs, now you're going to start a program right from scratch. So you're going to Ottawa U, and you are now going to step in there. What would be in terms of recruiting your athletes? What's your thought process? What are you looking for, and what are you going to do?
So that they already have a program, is what you're saying?
No, I'm saying no. So you're coming to Ottawa U. No, there's no men's program at Ottawa U other than a club team.
Okay.
So we're gonna do men.
Or Carleton, who cut their women's program off.
Women's team. There you go.
How's that?
That's
okay.
Good.
Yeah. So the first thing, you know, actually would be kind of exciting, because remember when I said that there's not that many blue chip athletes out there, but with the growth of club and, you know, especially in Ontario, like how strong club volleyball has become in Ontario, there is a whole lot of players that are that probably could do it, you know? So I would be doing my darndest to get the word out that, you know, do you want to challenge? You want to come in and play, you know, compete right away. And so I would be doing what I probably don't do, way more like a open ID camp and go big, and that's a big contrast. If you're only looking to fill one or two spots, you're just creating more work for yourself and false expectations for athletes in my opinion, by going really big in terms of your identification things. So I would flip that around, and it would be a bit who actually still come down to academics, because they're still going to be there for, you know, you want them to be there for 4 or 5 years. So they have to do well, and they've got to, you know, want to be in that educational institution and should be there for those reasons. So we have that, you know, that would be part of the process. But I actually think you would find, if a new program started in a fairly good academic institution, I don't think it would actually take them that long to be competitive. I'm not saying they're going to win, but they could be competitive pretty quickly. They might get one or two transfer players. There's fewer CCAA, but a CCAA athlete would now go, I played 2 or 3 years, let's say, somewhere. So instead of going to a stronger program and maybe sitting in another transition year, I really could be, I've got more experience. So I would look at both of those routes and who wanted to do it. Is that kind of along the lines of what you were looking for?
Yeah. So where would you go get your athletes, and how would you get your athletes? That's perfect. Yep, I could see that. Dave, what about you on the guy side, since that's the one that's more realistic for this program, in theory, hopefully?
I think I think anytime you're starting a program like that from scratch, I think you got to look at all your resources. First, I think you got to look at your physical resources. What physical resources do you have in the gym that you're going to be able to make sure that those kids understand that you're going to be able to make them better? What are you going to do there? So is that filming your practices? Is it your scouting for, your data volley? What are you doing to help make them better? So what physical resources can you put in place? What financial resources do you have to assist with them? And then you can look at your human resources. Who am I going to be working with? Who are they going to be working with? And, what can I get? I don't think just because it's a new program that you'd have to settle much. I agree with Doug. I think it wouldn't take very long to be competitive. I think you'd have to really make sure that you define that, but I think you got to look at your physical. I think you got to look at your financial, and I think you got to look at your human resources when you're building that infrastructure, and you get the best value for your money in all areas of that. And I think that if you can do that, then I think you'd probably change the slope of that success curve pretty quickly.
Brenda, you want to add anything?
No, I think these guys are good.
Good. All right, I'll keep that in mind and let whoever takes over that program know that. All right, so let's move on now. And some of the Mavs coaches have checked out because they have their coaching clinic, but for all those coaches still on, what advice would you guys give the coaches of club coaches at 16, 17, or 15 or 14, doesn't matter. What advice would you give them that they could go on to best help their athlete let's say, reach their goal of playing post-secondary, either being college or university, both one on like volleyball development, character development, and then finally the process of and Brenda's going to talk in detail about it, but what could the coach do to facilitate that process for them in terms of seasonal planning and just remembering to do it consciously versus, just hoping it naturally occurs. Who wants to
Maybe Dave, we can just go back and forth a little bit on some of those because there's a lot there. I'm going to start with one, because this could go up and down a little bit, but make sure, don't assume that athlete wants to or should or, play post-secondary. Like, do they really want to do it? And I think that's a strong role for the coach. Like, hey, laying out the positives and some of the negatives. I mean, you're giving up other things if you're going to try and compete and play at that kind of level. So understanding that, I think you're well placed in that regard, because is this your dream or mom or dad's dream, let's say? So that would be one role for, a club coach to take in early on. The second one, I would say, and I think we're developing this way, and I'm going to treat it really broadly, but in a couple of different ways. So number one, Lawrence Awula, who coached our national team a few times and a bunch of national teams, hit a line which was, don't ignore your best player. And a bit what he meant by that is don't ignore not just about tactically, but their mental development, their emotional development as well, i.e., don't necessarily let them get away with more. You might want to let them get away with less if you're going to prepare them well for the challenges of a transition to post-secondary. Because if they've had the most success, they kill most of the time, regardless of what their, how hard they worked at their spike approach. Let's just pick one thing or whatever, bombed one in and then made an error on the next ball. And, that doesn't look like it's changing. Those kind of approaches are going to be really hard for the longer they go on, harder to change. So I would say going as if that club coach can really look at where can this, not where they're at right now, but where can they get to? And, that's never going to be easy. So because all coaches want to win, but how can you actually be impacting the individual development of all your players, right? And setting those right cultures early on, that's going to make our jobs so much easier, so much better, and so much easier. And so less about the outcome for your 14, 15, 16, 17 more about building process, growth mindset you mentioned earlier, working through that, because we're inundated obviously in our society on the outcome piece. So, and that's not good. At a certain point, you're going to be up against, every athlete is going to be up against players that are either as or more experienced than them, more skilled than them, more physical than them. So if you look at it from that point of view, how is that person going to react? And can you help coach them and guide them to get some self-awareness earlier in their life to reflect and go, that's probably not going to cut it at whatever that next level would be. So that to me is just, it's not about specifics. It's about that becoming a better holistic all-around coach.
Dave?
The man's the best for a reason. And I think you hear it. The only thing I'd add that is that there is a little bit of, physical, technical, tactical, mental. And I think if you're going to focus on 14, 15, 16, the younger levels, the more physical capacity you can help build at that stage, the more it's going to help retain some of the techniques. And we're not going to redefine the wheel later on. The techniques don't change, but the more physical capacity they can do to withstand the training levels and understanding how to win, not just, yes, winning is important, or we wouldn't keep score. I don't want to discredit that. However, I think understanding how to win is really, really important. So if it's just, well, we feed number 12 all the time and we win, I'm not really sure that that's the solution. But I do think that there is some tactical understanding, and I know that they may not be able to do it all, but they should at least have an exposure to it or understand it so that they can think with the end in mind. But I do think that the physical capacity at the younger ages are going to set them up for longer term success if that's what they really want to do. But I agree with Doug that, they're going to have to get used to that competition model. And quite honestly, the margins get so small that if they don't understand how to be successful, they won't know how to deal with those really small margins. And then they won't be able to put in the work that is going to be required for them to get on the right side of that margin. So I think it's really important that kids understand what they're getting into, why they're getting into it, and how they need to be successful within that. Not just that this is our system, but this is the system that makes this group the most successful. And yes, there are other things that we could do, but based on this group, this is what's going to be most successful. And if you get to another level, you might play a different system, and you need to understand that. But I get kids going, well, I've never done that before. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, well, then you've already separated yourself from the pack from the ones who do. I think that it's really important that at that 14, 15, 16, they understand the game and not just, and I think with Doug's point, very first point about, do they really want this? It can be used to reinforce some of those behaviors down the line. Because if I say, hey, Doug, last year you told me that you really wanted this, but your behaviors aren't really reflecting that right now. So if you said you really wanted to do this, but you're not doing this day-to-day work, then what has changed? And how do we either get back to that path, or reevaluate the path you're currently on. So I think that them understanding that it is their goal or their mission and not mom and dad's or their coaches, then I think it's easier reinforced when the work gets a little harder and the margins get a little smaller.
I got two questions on those, what both of you guys have said. And they lead to this on the same topic. So let's say they don't want to play post-secondary. So let's say it's 17, 18U, and they say they don't want to play post-secondary. Should they be playing on a high-performance team where the goal is seemingly the goal for that is to excel beyond that year? I guess at 18U, why am I playing 18U club volleyball?
Probably because you love volleyball, I hope. You want to
volleyball. So,
and you want the social. You've played with this group maybe for 5 years.
Right. But does the impact, I guess the commitment level then becomes in question, right? Because there's such a short-term focus that how do I put in that extra work doing video analysis, or the coach is asking me to journal about what I'm seeing between games, and I'm going, well, why? I guess that as a coach, you have to figure out how to sell that athlete on how to be fully engaged and fully committed for that year. Because if they're not fully engaged or committed, that's going to impact the team, right? Because then it becomes for that athlete about convenience. Well, I'll do it if it's convenient. Because we see that at high school. High school.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure you. Oh, at high school, absolutely. Yeah.
So that becomes the question that I'm always challenged with, is that when you're at the top, in theory, your team is the top team in the club, and you have 8 girls or boys that want to play post-secondary, or that's their dream, and you have 1 or 2 that's filling in those spots. How to keep them motivated on something else so that they stay fully engaged, so that they support their teammates on trying to achieve their long-term goal. That becomes, I mean, that's the coach. That's part of coach.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very situational, but by and large, I'd actually say, having coached club, I'm actually more worried about some of the ones 17U. They're spending more time freaking out about which university coach is watching them or not watching them.
Colin,
just play. Yeah. Just get out there, be a good teammate, and compete hard. Like, whether don't be thinking about next year. We got to get kids thinking about that less, and that's, even though that's my job to get them thinking about it maybe more, overall less.
Yeah, that comes to other sets of questions about getting signed early and not getting signed and all that. Dealing with that at the 18-year level is fun.
Colin, I was going to suggest something a bit different, in that I think the focus should be on this year, and as long as the athlete's achieving what you set out, you should be satisfied with this year. Because in a lot of cases, those are future system builders too. Just because they don't want to play post-secondary doesn't mean they might not come back and coach club or become an official, or just play in an adult league later on because they love volleyball.
Right.
And it may just be a realistic, like they just don't see themselves cutting it, for whatever reason. It might be that they have to work, and don't have the time. Could be many, many things, but I think your focus is in the wrong place if you worry about that.
Right.
Unless they're not doing what you're asking.
Right.
And that would apply to any athlete, right?
And then along the same lines, then the opposite side, let's say they're saying, and again, I've experienced it this year, was the athlete saying, I'm not really interested in post-secondary anymore. And it was that person's dream, and she did everything possible that you could do to become your best athlete. But then when the crunch time comes down, it's that I'm afraid that I might not make it, right? And it's easier to say I don't want to do it versus taking the risk. And the challenge with doing it in an appropriate way, to challenge them to take on the risk and say, what's the worst thing that could happen, right? Is selling them on, what's the worst thing that could happen? If they say, sorry, we don't have a spot for you, well, then you put it all out in the line. Because when you're my age at 50, you're going, I wonder what if I would have. If I would have trained a little harder, Brenda wouldn't have cut me. If I didn't go out the night before physical testing, I might have made the team. And those things stick in, you know, you want to help those athletes remember that stuff, because sure, it's a big, the athletes live those goals, right, for 4 years about playing post-secondary, and then it's on the brink of doing it, and it's scary for them. And it's for, you know, it's really for us as coaches to help them work through that process, and that it's just a process. It's another game, another match. It's just, you may lose, you may win. You've done, but as long as you've done everything you possibly can to make it happen, that's all you can do. And you can walk away with your head held high, and you know the answer. And I think that's part of ours as club coaches, is to really be aware of that fear factor, determining the exterior answers coming from our athletes sometimes. And I think it's more, you see it in guys, with guys that say, oh, I don't care, oh, I don't do that, I don't that. Whereas girls, it's more of an emotional thing for them. But they're both the same in terms of, we got to address that, and we got to use our, you know, our social emotional skills to help them get through that part as well. So do you guys have any advice for coaches that maybe don't have the experience of dealing with that? What's some things they could do, or how to have a conversation about that type of thing?
Well, I do think fear can be an excellent motivator. I also think that fear can be a very big paralyzer. And I think there's a fine line that can be drawn there. So I think now, with today's student athlete, fear is much more of a paralyzer. And I do know that there are still athletes out there that that do respond, but fear of failure is a reality. We have to work their way through that. But yeah, I think, you know, the answer, there's no right answer to your question, Colin, but I do think that one solution can be with role definition and clarification. And as long as everybody understands what their role is and what they're supposed to do, and those change as they develop, right? Like, so sometimes the best players weren't always the best players at the start. So there is different roles and clarifications that need to be addressed at that stage. But yeah, you know what? I said this at the right beginning of the show, was that sometimes our roster turns over on the bottom end a little bit more than I would like, because life trumps sport. And sometimes volleyball becomes not that important anymore. And just because it is to the coach and how much we've invested in them, well, if it's not important to them anymore, we can't want it more than they do. So yeah, I know we've got a lot invested, but it's still their life. It's not ours. And we have to be honest and sincere with them about that at that stage. So we can try and help them through some of that stuff, but life changes. And we can try and clarify their roles as to where things have changed. But the reality of it is, we can't make them want it. And those are the things that sometimes we're looking for in coaches, where you can see that, you know, maybe they are, you know, Doug mentioned it, they're always looking at the coach, or they're always looking at their mom and dad. And is that their source of security? So I don't think there's any right answer, but I do think role definition and clarification can very much help. And you know, we could have an entire different show on how to manage fear and anxiety.
Colin, I think it's not an uncommon thing to have the courage, especially young women, you know, self-confidence and the courage to take risks. There's some great books, you know, even if they start with Brene Brown, or I think that's probably a good one, you know, just get them kind of reading and learning about courage and bravery, and you know, maybe they'll change their mind. But I think it's not uncommon.
Yeah, I think it's something that we have to explicitly teach. I use the word teach because I'm a teacher, but I think we explicitly have to teach those types of social emotional skills with our athletes too. And I think club is a great opportunity to do those things, because you're succeeding and you're failing at all times. So you can learn to deal with that, and you can use that in your life, and practice those skills, and practice the skills of dealing with those things. So I think, and I'm, you know, going back to our very first session with Vicky, talking about how that's how the long-term athlete development 3.0 now is moving towards that, saying that we as Coaching Association has done a good job of technical, tactical, and not a bad job with physical, but now we got to start implementing the social emotional side to our coaching components, which will be a challenge. You get your, as Mikhail would say, he's an engineer. He's not a teacher, so he doesn't have those skills. So it's going to be interesting how we help our club coaches develop these tools going forward, because we're asking more and more from our volunteer coaches, and it's going to be a challenge, I think, going forward for coaches to deal with these issues. But I think even having conversations like this will help those coaches recognize that we're all together and we're trying to move forward. And we should, as Brene says, we're going to own our own story, and we're going to make our errors, and we're going to learn from our errors. We're going to own them, and we're going to move forward, just like we're going to ask our athletes to do that, so our coaches can practice what they preach, and turn it from not just only on the court errors, but also in terms of trying to deal with the social emotional side errors as well. So that's good. Doug, did you want to add anything to that on the female side? I'm
going to be careful not to, because it'll take too long, and there's good stuff, but keep it moving.
Right on. All right, so down to a couple more questions here about coaches, how they can help. How involved should, and this is a little easier one, I think, how involved should the coach be in reaching out to post-secondary coaches on behalf of their athletes?
Again, a lot of these, it's going to depend a little bit on who, I think, the situation and the athlete. So I really don't mind from an out-of-province coach that they've contacted me. Expect an email from X, and here's a little background around it and why. So the second time could be, like there's times, because we get a lot of, email if something gets dropped or get back to her, you want clarification. Personally, I've got no problem. Like, I think it's a good thing. I don't want to get emails. I've got these 9 athletes, right? They're all graduating, and here's, what I think you should recruit them. But this person is really interested in your school because of X, and they may be a little bit behind developmentally in these areas. But if you're looking for something like this is why I think they might be a good fit, like their knowledge. So if you do a little bit of research or homework, I find that, it doesn't happen actually that often. So I don't know what you've found, or Brenda used to.
I'm in the same school as Doug on this one. If I get an introductory email from a coach, it's not an issue. If there's lots of follow-up on it and more of the conversations being driven by the coach, now I've got a little bit of an issue with some stuff. I'm not recruiting a coach, I'm recruiting a player. So I need to foster that development, or foster that relationship with that potential student athlete. So sometimes all a student athlete needs is a little bit of a connection. And if they don't have it and their coach can provide it, I'm okay with that. But as soon as you figure out who's driving the bus, then you can kind of sort it out from there.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think
it is one way for an athlete to stand out maybe a little bit more, is if they get that additional support from like one key coach.
Right. Yeah, so I saw that in action, and it does make a difference, especially if an athlete's looking at a province and the coach may have connections with those other coaches in terms of they know each other. I mean, our community is pretty small, so.
And especially calling if I know that coach. Like if I'm familiar with that coach and they reach out, and I encourage that. That's part of that network I was referring to before.
Right, for sure.
And then if you don't know that coach, and let's say you're a younger coach and you don't have that connection, you could say for further feedback, contact Dave Preston, right? Like, I know you know Dave or whatever. And if you feel you need more, he'd be willing to speak on behalf of her too, or a coach to her provincial team, or whatever the case may be. And it's just maybe one more link.
Perfect. Well, that's good. All right, so the last question on this section then is just to the athletes. What advice would you give to their athletes to make for the best chance of finding a spot, and not Brenda's going to talk about the academic stuff, but in terms for you guys, for the athlete, in terms of developing their skills, developing their athletic abilities, and then finally, in terms of how they should contact you, what's the best way?
Yeah, I think it's just encompassing from what we talked about before. I think they've got to advocate for themselves. They've got to be able to reach out. It shows good initiative. Be prepared. Have the tapes ready. Put your work in. I would say right now, if you're unfamiliar with the coach, then you got to reach out to them through an email or something. I guess right now, social media is an okay introductory as well if you don't have the coach's contact information, but most of our information is available on websites now, so it's not that hard to find. But so yeah, I would say just be prepared, advocate for yourself, and be persistent with it. If this is something you really want to go after, then make it happen.
I'll just give you a couple of specifics, a few do's and don'ts that I've seen. The more personalized you can go, interested in your school because of your strong academic program in this, make sure you get that academic program correct. Okay.
Yeah, I got lots of dear Mr. Wilson or dear Mr. Willis or dear, Wilson, seriously, it's no research whatsoever,
Not just the school, but show that you've done the homework around it. Because if you're going to say this is one of my top schools and I've been looking at it and I like your program because of this, you want to go, okay, it's easy to say that, but is this going to all 37 U Sport women's coaches or not? And so extend that a little bit more, that they've actually looked at the roster. I see that you are actually graduating some outside hitters this year, or, do you have some space? Because then I'm going, okay, they have at least dialed in there a little bit and understand more. So, we all like more personal stuff. So, frankly, I'm on a couple of recruiting service things and I just don't even, they're in the States, they're based out of the States. And I think it's because UBC has NAI programs in some sports, like we compete south of the border. And it's just like, it's hit delete as soon as I see it's there. Like I may have missed a kid somewhere along the line, but I'm willing to bet probably not, because I think this is going to hundreds, maybe thousands of institutions, right? And so I'm not going to spend my time on that. So that would be the contrast. And you don't need to make it super long. Like I'm not, this isn't an assignment for English 12, right? This is boom, more info.
Yeah. What did I have? Homework. Okay, yeah, sorry. In terms of their volleyball, what should they be doing to develop their volleyball? Because my communication to my team and to my camps is always that don't give up an opportunity to improve yourself, because your competitors right now may be doing that. Is that sort of the same philosophy you guys would give to them? Is don't give up an opportunity to develop your skills, develop yourself physically, just because you've got to set yourself apart from everybody else, or at least move yourself up the line in terms of those skills and take advantage of trying to outwork your competitors.
I think Dave earlier on touched on something I really agreed with, was looking earlier on at like the idea around raising your physical capacity, your ability to train, not just doing more camps. I'll say, I think there's a difference between that, because I see this a lot, like, okay, I got to keep doing that. But actually that awareness, and the coach can help with this, like what's actually going to be your limiting factor of making it to the next level, right? And so, take a look at that in relation to the competition at that one, and that's going to help your club team anyways doing that, or high school program, if you can help that kid do that. So on the women, sometimes that's like Dave made an example. He goes to other coaches who can hit a ball at a system, right? Like, so are we getting enough reps? Like, you don't hit well out of system, and you're going to have to do that, right? Like, coaches are going to look at that because we're going to be out of system more than 50% of the time. Like, I'm sure you can create the other things going, okay, we're not spending that much time on blocking in our program because it's not going to help us that much, but you're going to need to learn to block better if your goals are to do this. So helping guide that way. For women, it's, for a lot of them, is we need more women that hit the ball harder and from a higher point in our country. So can we help those players that might have that potential to do that better? And I'll live with one more mistake or two more mistakes. Next, can they hit it off the block? Can you give them an edge by having them use a block, not just, like those kinds of things, like dealing in? That's where I think you help that athlete for sure. You help a university coach, and you're probably helping your.
Perfect. Anything, Dave, on the guys' side?
Yeah, Colin, I think if you ask that question to 50 athletes, you get 50 different answers. Right. So I think every athlete should know what it's going to take for them to reach that next level. Some are going to need that physical capacity, but some are really, really physical already, and they're lacking some of that technique. But I think it's in human nature for people to want to do more often what they're good at. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to develop. So they may have to spend some time at different points, but I don't think that it's going to deviate from that chart that I talked about before, where it's physical, technical, tactical, mental. They have to be physically capable of handling our training volume, and they have to be technically. It doesn't matter what system we're playing if they can't dig. If they can't dig, it doesn't matter what our defensive system looks like. So there's got to be some technical capacity there. And but again, that's every athlete will be at a different continuum in that point, and the coach is there, I believe, to help each of those athletes raise their level to do whatever. I don't, I know there's a saying that's, rising tide raises all boats, but every athlete is at a different point out there. So you're going to raise all the tide, but you also have to deal with those individual boats.
Right. It's good. All right. Just before we get Brenda to go through the step process, Adriana had a question. So Adriana, if you want to turn on your mic, and you can ask the panel your question.
Hello.
Hey, Dave.
There's no recruiting at this stage, right? There's no.
It's already done. He's already committed. So.
Where?
Sao Paulo.
Oh.
Yeah, my question, nice to see you. My question was more about like last year, and like every year, I see kids there, they commit with some schools, and after they commit to a school, they shut down. And this happened in their age 17 or 18. If they commit in 17, they're not fully shut down, but if they commit in their commitment happened in the age 18. I saw teams, and this happened with my son team last year, like half the team already commit, and they couldn't play.
They check out.
They check out. Like it was conversation with the players, say that conversation with the coach, and how coaches for university, I don't know if this happened, can help with the coaches in the club or the athletes understand that this is not time for them to not play. It was it. It's a time for them to play more, and because they're not starting any level yet.
Yeah.
I think you answered your own question.
Compared to everybody else, right?
Yeah, I agree, Adriana. And I think that's a big thing is that when athletes do commit or whatever, they think it's an end goal, right? It's okay, I've arrived. I'm now there. And so it's almost a relief. And I think one of the things as coaches that we can help that is when I talk about behaviors, and if we say, hey, look, Doug, we said that we were going to be working at this level and you've committed to this level, but your behaviors recently aren't reflecting that. So we either got to reassess what's going on here, whether that's your training and your competition level, your compete factor, all those kind of things. But I think having a good foundational relationship with that athlete, it's easier to have that conversation. But they see it as it's okay, I've arrived and I can relax. And I think that is a statement to the process as well, because it's so taxing on the athlete, and that they get there and just like, oh, and it's a relief. And so we got to help them make sure that say, look, if you're not developing, as Colin mentioned before, somebody else probably is. So although you may think you've arrived, everybody else in that program is continuing to work harder. And I think you're going to need to understand that a little bit more too. So there is a human component to it, but there's also a development component. And that's where we talk, I think, about that role definition and clarification. And hey, Doug, we need to keep going here, right? Like you're not there yet. You may have reached a milestone, but you haven't reached, and the way our football coach puts it is that there's no goal line here. There's no finish line. The development doesn't have a finish line. You just keep going and going, higher, faster, stronger. So I recognize the issue. I think the more foundational relationship you have with the athlete, it's easier to address. But I think when you hold them to role definition and clarification expectations, it's easier to have that to say, look, what you're doing isn't what you said you were going to do. And what do we do about that?
Yeah, I think as a club coach with 18 new players, I learned from my mistake was with the 96s, our goal was we want to play a university volleyball. Everybody's goal was to do that. And once we got to 18U and people signed and they made the volleyball, then they sort of plateaued at first year university because I've done it. I've met my goal, and we never talked about what comes after that. And I think part of with as coaches, especially with the ones that we know that are going to play post-secondary, we got to get them thinking, how do I be an all-Canadian? How do I be an all-star? What do I got to do to set other goals on top of that, and to move your 4 years through that to help them not think that I made a team and that's it. Like I plateaued and now what, you get lost. Like have it as a stepping stone to other goals going forward. And then on the other hand is within a team, it's important for coaches to explicitly have that conversation at the beginning of the year saying, listen, some of us are going to get signed early. Some of us are going to be stressed by not getting signed. Some of us are not going to get signed, but we're as a team trying to focus to the end. And each of us have our roles to develop and help each other try to achieve that goal. So if you're signed early, we need you helping those other players get signed by showing and playing your best so that they can show and play their best in competition. And putting that role and responsibility on each athlete to support each other as they go forward. Because I know it's a huge around Christmas time, you could see that happening. And I've seen it with other teams where it just explodes to a individualized program versus a team cohesion that was together for 5 years. Now it's done because they've met that one goal, and like you said, it's a huge mental release for them. So it's important for coaches, I think, to have that explicitly be talking about it all the time. That we're here to support each other. We're happy for each other when there's successes, and we're there for them when we're there to help when there's the failures, and support each other through those times. So, serving boyfriends, girlfriends, family situations, and then including university acceptance or rejection as well. I think that's an important aspect that if club coaches, especially at 17 and 18, you have to take on and really be cognizant of it as they coach through the season. Anybody else want to add anything to that one?
Can I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
Doug, you coach Shanice, right?
Pardon me?
Shanice Marcel.
Yes.
You did a great job with her because I coach her in the national team now in the beach. And she really talked very well about you and about the program and how you guys, the years that she passed with you was incredible. Was the best years that she had in her life in terms of school. Just went to kind of.
Right. Well,
awesome.
she made me look pretty good as a coach.
What do we hear from the athletes?
I only bring on the best, right? I mean, I'm not.
No, she was. I mean, actually, she's got some good blog posts too. Just generally, but even going back, compares her. I think her blog post comparing like NCAA versus U Sport would help a lot of athletes. Actually, like just the difference. It's not saying one's better, but it gives them a bit of a sense. I felt in just reading it. But yeah, she's the best part of coaching post-secondary and probably the younger ages, is seeing these guys develop over their 5 years and then see what kind of people they become afterwards. So
For sure.
that's the part I like.
Great. Thank you, guys. So now we're going to get Brenda to just sort of give the athletes and coaches a sort of a time frame thought process around academics and post-secondary in terms of when you should start thinking about it, what you should be thinking about, sort of a chronological timestamp of what you should be doing, just to give that last piece of tools for coaches and for athletes and for parents to finish off. And then we'll just wrap up after that with a few, if there's any other questions.
Colin, you need to give me back the screen share.
What? Multiple versions? You can't share it?
Doesn't appear so. Maybe I have to.
It's not coming up. All right, I'll just give you a host and you can do it all. But give it back to me. Don't keep it.
Of course.
Make host. All right, you should be host.
Okay, can you see that?
It's coming. Yep.
Everyone can see it. Okay, I'm going to go through this really quickly because it's almost past my bedtime. But he had asked me, Colin had asked me to go through like preparing for the recruiting process, less from the coach standpoint as the parent or the athlete standpoint. So very quickly, I'm going to say that the very first thing that families should do or individual students should do is figure out kind of on a broad scale what they want to study. And that can happen in grade 10 if they already know, or I would say early in grade 11, they should already be starting to do some work. And searching the different websites of schools to find out about admission requirements, who has the specific programs they're interested in, and all of that. And of course, when the time comes, they apply through the Ontario University Application Centre, only for schools within Ontario, direct applications if they're going outside the province, and they will also have to manage the SAT process if they are thinking of going to the States. Then in terms of getting recruited, I'm just going to say that most coaches don't mind a highlight reel if it's really short, just to catch their eye, or actually on the flip side to quickly decide, no, that's not what I'm looking for. And then potentially you can start collecting full match video for the coach to potentially view, especially in this COVID environment. Full match, try not to edit it. We are not dumb. We know when pieces have been taken out. Good idea to provide the coach with your competition schedule or even invite them to some tournaments. Most coaches do want you to communicate and not your parents, and show some initiative. Come to matches. You can potentially request a tour or a meeting with the coach. So you take some initiative in all of this. Certainly the blue chippers, the process will take care of themselves from the coaching end. But if you're just under that, or you don't feel that that's happened for you yet, you can certainly initiate the process. In making the decisions how to start, I think my advice would be to create 3 separate mindsets and lists, one around academic programs, one around the volleyball program, and one around life. And of course, what I mean by academic program, very quickly, I truly believe that students have kind of a 2-sided cliff, what their interests are and what their aptitudes are. And if they stay in that lane between those 2 things, that they really are setting themselves up for success academically. And then to understand what the options in the program are, whether they want co-op. I've had students who wanted engineering, and only after they got into the program did they find out we didn't have aerospace, as an example. So if you have a real specialty, you need to know about it in advance. As athletes, you probably want to know if you're allowed to reduce your course load from the standard, load to an 80% load, so you can do it over 4 or 5. This is an interesting one in academic programs. I think it's important to athletes. There are a lot of programs that are a pyramid system. So for example, if they take 1,000 engineers in first year, they might have 750 seats in the second year class, and 600 seats in third year, and 500 seats in fourth year. So they're actually looking to weed out 50% of the students in a program, and others are much more cylindrical. So if they take 1,000 students in first year, they have 1,000 seats all the way through. And in fact, if 10% of the class fail out or change programs, they'll actually take transfer students to keep that cylindrical type of system in place. So that's it. I think for athletes, an important thing to know, because it changes the culture academically. If it's a pyramid, it tends to be a competitive environment, and you're competing against some people whose sole thing is academia. And so it's very hard to stay as competitive as you'd like. Where in a cylindrical system, it's much more cooperative. People tend to help each other do well because you're not competing for that seat in the next year. And of course, issues around work study and co-op. Some places require you to do a co-op. It can be very difficult in your athlete pathway. So that's something to consider. I'm not saying what's right or wrong. Other things you may want to ask are, what percentage of people graduate? What percentage of the people, double percent, of the people have job placements before graduation or within the first 6 months or whatever? And of course about costs and tuition, awards and bursaries. So those were all really well dealt with by Dave and Doug. So I'm just going to keep going. You really need to know what you're looking for. And to find out what they're looking for. And when I say what you're looking for, I'm also thinking about, there are some athletes, Dave said it really well, about the athletes who they want the assurance of the spot and all that. They want to be the player that you're going to build a program around. Others want to play with the best, even if it means way less playing time. So as an individual, you need to figure out what you want and then how that's going to fit into what they want. So hopefully coaches will be honest with you. I would say connecting with the coaching staff, learning about their leadership style, their philosophy. If you're the kind of athlete that hates to be screamed at, you need to know if you're leaning towards a school with a screaming coach, or vice versa. If you want your butt kicked all the time and it's a coach who trusts that you're going to motivate yourself, that probably won't work. So all the things around the program, goals, budget, I think the guys talked about this really well. And just, where does it fit in the school's importance? If it's really not handled as an important thing and it's important to you, that might not be the best mix. Okay, and then the third pillar, I think, is just life. And that's the one that I think lots of times athletes forget about. They're so obsessed with, making a volleyball decision that kind of works with an academic decision. But what I mean by that is, do you want to be close to home? Doug alluded to it. Sometimes they're homesick if they go too far away. How are you going to handle that? Do you like big cities, small cities, big campuses, small campuses? Those are all things to consider. As Doug said, if you break your leg and you got to spend the next year on a campus without the sport you love, are you going to go, what the hell am I doing here? It has to fit. Same thing with the residents, be it on campus or off campus. Meal plans. These are all things that can translate into anxiety for an athlete. If they don't have food you like, if you're not eating properly, if you can't get sleep in residence, or it has to be a double room and you've never been in a shared accommodation before in your life, those can be issues for you. So it's really important. Proximity to amenities, is that important to you? Things like the cost and the proximity of off-campus housing, and is housing easily available? I know people who commute, 20 minutes on a city bus or more to get, an hour on a subway to get to school. That's fine if that's what you want, but I think it should be weighed in to your choices. And of course, campus vibe, fan support, that's all part of the life piece that I'm talking about. So all three should align for you to make a good choice. I think one thing everybody should know is in Canada, we have formal campus visits and informal campus visits. And you're entitled to one formal, which means some funding in that visit, whether it's fully paid for or whether they buy you lunch. It doesn't matter. As soon as you spend money, it becomes a formal campus visit. So you're entitled to one formal visit every 365 days, or 2 years in a row. 365 days apart is probably a better way to say it. But there's no restriction on informal visits. You can come and watch home games in their gym. You can potentially watch practice if you're doing that of your own accord, and those are informal. But as soon as anything's structured or funded, it's a formal visit. I would also advise you to visit the city, not just the campus. Take a tour. You can get academic appointments with undergraduate advisors in various programs if you have specific questions. Try to meet players, meet the coach. We've talked about that. Yeah, it's a good idea to talk to athletes. Try to learn a little bit about their culture and how they operate and that sort of thing. If you are considering leaving the country, know the facts. Things like you can only get 4 years of funding, but typically an athlete needs at least 5 years to finish school. It can actually cost you more in the 5th year in the US than it would to just pay for school in Canada. And injury clauses and things like that in your scholarship are things you need to know about in the US. So if you're considering that, make sure you know the facts, because an awful lot of athletes end up coming back because they didn't. Okay, and I'm going to finish it off just with asking the right questions. If you are academically inclined, make sure you don't have too many conflicts between what you want to study and the training schedule, because that can set you up for failure on both ends. And if there are conflicts, how are those handled? Is there an integrated support team with academic support, therapy, strength and conditioning? You know, are those all built into the program? Do you have to pay for them? Are they full-time within the department? Those kinds of things are really important to know. So I encourage you to ask a ton of questions. This PowerPoint is going to be posted along with Colin's presentation. And I think for me, one of the biggest downfalls, you know, we were talking about pitfalls earlier. If the athlete is the kind of student that needs mom or dad to say, go do your homework all the time, you know, if they've created a big structure and now you move away and you have no structure, that's a downfall. So if parents are listening, try to create some independence by grade 11, some accountability, of course, but some independence so that the student athletes learn the skills they need to have to be independent learners and athletes when they leave home. That's it for me.
Awesome. All right, you want to give me back my powers?
Sure. You are now the host.
Thank you. Dave and Doug, do you guys have anything to add to that? Other than it was great.
Oh, that's awesome. Very comprehensive. I think, you know, as much of a structure as we want to put a little box around this, recruiting is very individualized. You know, there's a lot of templates that you can follow, but you just got to do what's right for you.
Right. The only thing I would add is use your guide. In high school, I would use a guidance counselor. The guidance counselor has lots of connections with academic programs, can get those meetings set up for their academic tours. They're a useful tool, especially nowadays. I would really emphasize using your guidance counselor at school to help you out get through the process, especially if you're starting to look in grade 11, because it's tough making those decisions. Okay, if anyone else has any questions, since there's only 3 of you coaches left on here, you guys can just turn your mic on and ask a question if you want, or make a comment. Since it is my kitchen table, no worries. We're all friends here. If you leave your mics off, I assume that means you have nothing to say. So I will want to personally thank Doug, Brenda, and Dave for coming on and giving up some of their time to give us this great information on post-secondary education and what coaches can do and what athletes should do in terms of helping themselves and helping their athletes reach that next level. And again, as you coaches, that you've seen us throughout all these sessions, that these people that are up there on that next level of volleyball for us, you know, either with Volleyball Canada with Carrie McDonald or Donna Sales, or even Sport for Life with Vicky, all these people are very personable and willing to share their information with you. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out to any of us, or especially them. I mean, I'm just a neophyte sitting in here trying to connect us all, but I think it's great opportunity for coaches to, again, broaden where they've come from and what they're doing, and recognize that the people that we put up on pedestals, they deserve to be up there because of their work ethic, but they're also very approachable and they'll come and talk to us. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out to them. One more time again, Doug, Brenda, and Dave, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Everybody, we will send out an email or a survey checking to see if there's any other topics of interest for you guys, and we'll try to keep bringing in these great experts in to keep giving us more stuff on volleyball. Other than that, I'm done. Kitchen table is closed. Time to clean it off. Thanks again, everybody. This will be posted on YouTube on our SportsCan channel, so please subscribe to it and check it out and send it to your coaches. Send it to all your club coaches out there. I think all this information we've done over the last 5 sessions would be totally valuable for them, and it doesn't take a lot of time to get through it all as well. So thanks again, everybody. We will see you on the court, hopefully sooner than later.